Senior Cultural Heritage Officer at Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. It sounds like a very grand title. Sounds like I deal with all sorts of very highbrow things. In fact, most of the time I deal with things which are actually below the ground. And one notable and it's caused a lot of interest in my work, the exception, is the line of pillboxes along the River Trent, Tame and Dove in the Trent Valley. And so I would like to speak about some of the history that led to the construction of pillboxes, talk about some of the other military heritage in the Trent Valley area, talk about also the way that this is still affecting people's lives and the questions which we are learning we need to ask about our military heritage in that area. So let's move on to my next slide. I don't know how the audience, how much the audience knows about the history behind the Second World War and the ways it changed the world. Now, normally when I give these talks, of course, I have the advantage that I can actually see my audience and know if they're likely to have actually lived in the age of the war or just after, when you would know a great deal. I found my own children, although maybe because of my job, don't know a huge amount about the war, possibly because every time it's mentioned, it's just like, oh, it's Dad's job again. So I'm going to give a little bit of background. When we look at the Second World War, you can't look at it without actually considering the effects of the First World War. So Wall Street crash in 1929 created waves that spread across the world, bringing suffering and misery to many. Depression is a great description of this time. It was a time of great hardship for very many people, but few countries fared worse than Germany. The First World War ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, and this required Germany to pay reparations, a compensation scheme to the World War I allies who beat her, and also left Germany under partial military control, losing territory, and this demeaned the pride of that nation. Is the background which allowed the Nazi Party to gain popularity in the country. The rise of Hitler led inevitably to the Second World War. Hitler had a policy which was based upon taking land from other countries in order to benefit his German economy. Britain entered the Second World War in 1939, but there was a long period when it was known as the Phony War. That all ended with the invasion of France. The French invasion, the Blitzkrieg that Germany undertook, Blitzkrieg is a lightning war, it's a literal translation, pushed the British army and the French army back with frightening speed. And by May, the decision was made that the British army had no choice but to evacuate. I'm sure many people have heard of the story of the little ships of Dunkirk, private boats being used to ferry troops off the beach. But the result of it was much was left behind. British troops crammed onto boats, unable to take most of their heavy equipment. The loss of men as prisoners of war, the loss of equipment left Britain alone, under-equipped, weary and exposed. What Britain did have was a new Prime Minister who evoked the nation's fighting spirit, and the nation prepared for the next stage of the war. Germany was preparing to invade Britain. The plan was called Operation Sea Lion. The plan was to use European barges, large river barges, to ferry German soldiers across the Channel. The view in Germany was that air superiority had to be achieved, and that then led to the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force was able to stop Germany from achieving air superiority in a battle that took months. And I'm just going to skip that. By September the 15th, Germany had its biggest push and finally tired of the air war. Hitler, famous for his short attention span, fortunately for Britain and unfortunate for his neighbours to the east, decided to turn his attention to Russia and launch the invasion of Russia. So Operation Sea Lion never happened, but it does beg the question, how was Britain ready to respond if it had gone ahead? And Britain had pillboxes. Pillboxes, small fortifications. You can see this fine group of Home Guard reenactors standing in front of a pillbox. These are fixed defensive emplacements. They are places which are not designed to defeat the enemy, but they do give small forces the chance to slow the enemy down. With the lack of resources that were in Britain, the lack of transport, the intention was to have a pillbox network which would delay invading groups wherever they were, so that local forces could hold them off whilst more forces were ferried around the country and brought to then join on the front line wherever they were actually needed. The scary bit about this is the British Army, even before Dunkirk, did not have sufficient transport to ferry troops in the numbers that they would require around the country. And so a plan was actually in place for the requisitioning of buses. And these would have been taken over by the army and they would have been taken to the front line on a bus. Pillboxes are interesting. Nearly every pillbox that you'll come across in Britain was built in 1940. And I think that in itself is a massive civil engineering feat and a massive national effort, especially when you consider all of the other things that were actually happening at the time. So Britain was recruiting and arming itself. Britain was having to undergo defense, having to deal with food shortages. There was the war in the Atlantic, which was threatening the food supply to Britain. And yet so many resources were put into the construction of this defensive line, these defensive networks, that it was achieved within a year. See, Britain had less than 1,000 tanks after Dunkirk. It had 500,000 troops. What it did have was the local defence volunteers, soon to be the Home Guard. Weaponry after Dunkirk was a confused mess, in all honesty. A lot of weapons were brought out of storage, which had been there since the First World War. Also, a lot of weapons were brought over, First World War weapons from Canada and America, which were different calibre to those used by the British Army, which made supplying ammunition more complicated than ever. Soldiers and Home Guard were trained in improvised weapons, Molotov cocktails, the famous petrol bomb, shotguns, and yeah, scarily, homemade spears. The Home Guard manual at the time had a description of how to make a spear by welding a bayonet into a piece of pipework. The thought of being someone given that and told to fight off German paratroops is very scary. It would be comical if it weren't that that was the desperate situation that Britain was in. So, pillboxes in the landscape would be situated strategic, oh, excuse me, bit of a zoom mistake there. Pillbox situated at strategic positions. It would leave attacking forces vulnerable, and the Trent Valley, along the associated tributaries, the Tame and the Dove, was considered to be an ideal site, an ideal location for a strategic defensive line. Much of the land in 1940 is not as you would see it today if you were to drive along the River Trent. It was often undrained and marshy. there were numerous small channels flowing into the river off adjacent land. And so enemy forces would already be having trouble crossing the Trent. It was also decided to site the pillboxes at the weak points in the natural barrier. And so you would find pillboxes situated near bridges, situated near shallows in the river, and also situated along railway lines at both bridges and junctions. This was actually making the best use of the Trent Valley landscape, which is a flat landscape. I think you can see from the pictures that it is a flat area. It would be easy to move armour across the Trent Valley if it was available. And so pillboxes, if you like, would act as fixed tanks. So I'll show you the one of the World War I weapons, which would have been used by Home Guard. And this is a Lewis gun, and these elderly machines would have been used to defend it. The intention was that pillboxes could have up to 7 machine guns in a standard size pillbox, but they were looking at having much more advanced weaponry than this. And so here we have, again, some of our reenactors. The Home Guards, as far as we know, were the main people for garrisoning pillboxes, and they were not equipped for what was expected of them. They did move away from spears, but a lot of these men would have to defend their pillbox with an aged rifle with only 10 bullets. A very frightening thought, and I don't think they would have been very effective in slowing down and stopping enemy forces. About 5 years ago, there was an idea to create a living landscape project, transforming the Trent Valley, and that is the project I work on. And transforming the Trent Valley is a project which helps to bring ideas, to bring changes, and to bring improvements for people, for heritage, for wildlife. We're set in the area, you can see the map. We work along the river valleys, and so to the south, we have the Tame Valley. We have to the southwest, the Trent Valley coming from Colwich, where our project work starts, and then swinging north with the Tame joining it through Burton upon Trent, and the Dove, which is to the northwest, flows in from Roster near Uttoxeter and moves along to actually just north of Burton at Willington, join the Trent, and then we work a little bit further downstream and include part of Derbyshire, although our project is run by Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. My part of the work within transforming the Trent Valley when it comes to the military heritage of the Trent Valley is to find, survey, listen, record, and research. So what does that mean? We know where most pillboxes are in Britain, and that's because in the 20th century, there was a national volunteer effort, the Defence of Britain project, and it went out, mapped and recorded as many pillboxes as the volunteers on it could find. And from that, we have a fairly comprehensive map of the World War II defences in the Trent Valley. Some things have been missed. Some things haven't been recorded correctly. So we go out, we find these places, we visit them, we carry out a survey, and this is mainly using volunteers. And so we have a straightforward survey form. Volunteers go and carry out an inspection of a pillbox. They note down its condition, they note down any factors which might be causing any risk to the pillbox. And from there, we're also listening to the stories about the pillbox network, because we're trying to not only record and protect the pillboxes, but before it's too late, to record and protect memories about the effect that pillboxes have had upon the people who live in the local area, the effect they've had on their landscape. And most interestingly, I think, for me, is to research the unanswered questions. about pillboxes. Now, it seems fairly clear. It seems certainly clear to me that this was going to be a very simple thing to do when I first started. This is from the Second World War. There are ample information and records from the Second World War. We know who commissioned the pillboxes. That was the Commander of Home Forces, General Ironside. We know what the philosophy was, but actually, when it gets to the local level, we know very little about pillboxes. We don't know who decided on where pillboxes were situated. Some pillboxes, we're starting to actually learn the answers to our questions. We had pillboxes which had us scratching our heads as to why they've been sited on the edge of a field, overlooking the river, where there didn't seem to be any strategic importance. And this is where the listening came in. So speaking to local farmers, local people who'd lived there for all of their lives, we started to build a picture. Some of these pillboxes, they were still in the same place, but the river had changed its form. And so pillboxes that might have actually been situated by a gravelly riffle, where it would have been easy to ford the Trent, were now actually situated next to a deep channel where you would not want to actually try and get across the river at that point, especially if you were under fire. We have other questions which we want to ask about the pillboxes. We don't know who garrisoned these pillboxes. As I said earlier, when we were starting the project, there is an awful lot of anecdotal information about home guards garrisoning pillboxes, but there are also records of regular troops garrisoning pillboxes, and at different times, depending on what was effectively the threat level and the availability of regular troops. So we would like to know who was garrisoning individual pillboxes. I found one which I think certainly someone must have garrisoned it for some time, because they had a certain amount of pride in it. I have visited one pillbox which is whitewashed down on the inside, and any holes from the construction have been plugged roughly with mortar. So somebody was a regular at that one. Now, our Trent Valley pillboxes are, majority of them, the Type 24 pillbox. This is one situated on a aqueduct just north of Burton-on-Trent, near clay houses. This one, interestingly, has been converted into a bat roost, which is another part of our project for the future. I'll come back to that. So the Type 24, these little fortresses, hexagon shaped with a Y-shaped blast wall inside. Now, one thing I've been surprised at is, since I started this work, is how few people have ever actually been into a pillbox. Pillboxes are often on private land. They're often inaccessible, and if they are inaccessible, unfortunately, there's often been antisocial behaviour that would discourage you from actually walking through the door, usually because of the smell, I'm afraid. So the Type 24 was one of a suite of specifications for standard pillboxes to be used throughout the country. What did happen as a result of this big push to build pillboxes in 1940 is that adaptations had to be made. So in some areas, you'll find pillboxes have been made with brick, and in some areas they're concrete. The surprising thing is about the brick pillboxes, those are not brick walls, effectively. What happened was that brick walls were built, and there'll be two brick walls running parallel, and concrete would be poured in between them. The brick was effectively shuttering. And it seems in some areas, because of wartime shortages, bricks were actually in greater supply than timber for creating the formwork to mould a pillbox. However, our local pillboxes on what is known as stop line number 5 all appear to be made of reinforced concrete. Certainly the Type 24s and other local variants have. And these would be built by effectively creating a mould. It seems to have taken 4 days to build a pillbox from the point where you start pouring concrete. And we know this because, as you can see from the picture, on the inside of the pillbox, they are so well preserved, you can actually see the marks where the planks went and the where the joins are where the concrete will just fill into the joins between the planks. And as you get higher up the pillbox, you start to find where the next day's work started, because the join is a little bit rougher. So we've been able to count that. So 4 days of concrete pouring. The pillboxes are in very good condition, and something we would like to confirm, but the hypothesis at the moment is this is because often, in order to get concrete to set very quickly, so that things could be built rapidly in the war, then a very strong cement mix was used in the concrete. And so with a high proportion of cement, the concrete would cure very quickly. It makes it incredibly hard. It's more expensive than other methods, but due to the rush, I would imagine, and this is another question which we would like to have answered, why were the pillboxes built with such a hard cement mix? It has led, though, to buildings which have weathered against the ravages of time incredibly well. Now, I said the Type 24 was the main pillbox in the Trent Valley. However, looking at Defence of Britain database, it said there were a number of Type 23s. Now, I've been out and visited some of these Type 23s, and they're not the Type 23. We have specifications for Type 23 pillbox. It is a large rectangular pillbox. However, it also has an open area which can be used for anti-aircraft guns. What we're looking at here is a completely different pillbox. This is a pillbox which we do not have a War Department specification for. Now that's interesting. So why are these pillboxes different? We don't know. We have theories, but we have hypotheses, but we do not know. These are small rectangular pillboxes. They would probably have a garrison of 4 men. They are often built near to railway lines, but not exclusively. And when we've contacted pillbox enthusiasts around the country, they're unfamiliar with the design. So they have a mono-pitched roof, as you can see from the picture on the right. They are a mystery. They were camouflaged with black tar, and you can see remains of that black tar on them. I've also found one which has the remains of a dummy chimney. So one theory might be that they were actually built to reflect vernacular farm buildings of the time as a form of camouflage. Vernacular farm buildings often be corrugated iron for things like field shelters, and often rust-proofed by putting black bitumen onto them. But these are questions which we would like to answer. Why are these pillboxes that are different to pillboxes anywhere else we know here? Are these pillboxes anywhere else? And what is the link with the railways? And are these 1940 pillboxes, or are these pillboxes built later on in order to what was perceived to be a gap in the defensive network? Now, as I said, transforming the Trent Valley is a Staffordshire Wildlife Trust project. So you probably won't be surprised that we are interested in the wildlife associated with the pillboxes. Now, what use is a little concrete bunker that's 80 years old to wildlife? And well, not surprisingly, when you think about it, pillboxes act ecologically rather like an artificial cave. They've got very similar temperature. They've got sort of shelter a cave offers. And I've got 2 examples of pillbox wildlife that we find here. Now, on the lower right, we have herald moths. So this is a species of moth that was originally a cave dweller. It now likes to use outbuildings, farm buildings, derelict buildings, and pillboxes as an area to hibernate. The one at the top left, that is, well, those are snails. Snails love pillboxes. A wonderfully sheltered place, safe from predators. We find huge amounts of snails either sleeping overnight or indeed hibernating in pillboxes. Now, I've said I'm going to come on to bat roosts in later on in this talk, but I visited a bat roost pillbox conversion which had been done by the Environment Agency. And we had a look inside to see for evidence of any bats in there. We found none. That was really disappointing. And then we found the reason why there was a lack of bats seems to be down to the fact that the one aperture left open for bats to actually enter was completely blocked with snails. So there was a mound of snails all holding onto each other's shells about 3 inches deep, obscuring the exit. So yes, I suggested that the Environment Agency might want to take out a couple of bricks and make the hole a little bit bigger that they'd left for the bats, and hopefully that will now have done it. And pillboxes, as I said, antisocial behaviour. This is pillbox out in the woods, very hard to find. You'd expect that maybe no one had bothered it for years, but as soon as I looked through that, I couldn't even get into the pillbox without actually having to walk on cans and bottles all over the place. So unfortunately, they do make rather good hideouts for people to go and have a crafty party. So that's unfortunate that they do attract that sort of antisocial behaviour, and that has actually given them something of a bad rap over the years for the people whose lands they're on, because they attract trouble into their lands. A brief note about other types of pillboxes. This is an RAF pillbox. We find a few of these on the edge of the Trent Valley, on the southern edge of the RAF base that is now the Toyota factory. And these are known as mushroom pillboxes, and the reason being that they have this continuous groove all the way across for machine guns to be slid on rails, and the roof is actually held up by a central column and resembles a great big concrete mushroom. So we're always on the lookout as we go about and for different military buildings that may not be recorded, different military buildings which haven't been photographed and aren't on the Staffordshire Historic Environment Record. And so, yes, they don't all look hexagonal or square, and there are a variety of designs, and they will be there for different purposes. Interesting aside about the Royal Air Force design of pillboxes is that the primary area they were looking at was to be actually firing on their own airfield. That seems a little bit crazy to our mind. Wouldn't you be defending the airfield from attackers? But in fact, the philosophy was that German forces would probably parachute onto airfields, destroy aircraft. Now, this was the British actually thinking that the Germans would fight like the British. This is the sort of work that the SAS were famous for from later parts of the Second World War, and the sort of operation they still train for. German paratroops weren't actually planning on anything like that. They wanted to get into fields, gather themselves together, and then move forward as a front. So, yes, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened, because if had they been attacked, then that doorway you see would actually have been facing the attackers, most likely under the German style of invasion. In conclusions about the pillboxes, they could be a strong point. They could also be a death trap. Get stuck in a pillbox when you've got invading forces on. If they encircle you, then you haven't got a chance. One thing we have noted about the pillboxes in the Trent Valley is there are not any associated signs of trenches, of escape routes. So you can't get out of the pillbox if you get surrounded. I don't know if you can hear this annoying clicking which I have on my audio. That's left over from when I used this slide for a previous talk. So, have other military heritage within the Trent Valley, and this is B&Q in Burton-on-Trent. B&Q, you may think, well, what is the link between B&Q and the military heritage of Burton-on-Trent? And this is it. So B&Q was built on the site of a timber yard which closed, and the yards lost employees who had joined up and fought in both world wars. So when B&Q developed the site, they took the memorial plaques, which are sat in the offices of the former occupier, Knight Brothers, and they remounted them. I feel it's a shame they are, when you just go back, you can see that they're mounted just behind where you pick up your trolley from. It seems like an unlikely place for a war memorial. I am very pleased, though, that the plaques are still where they belong. And I'm very pleased that if you know where they are, you can find them. One of the things which we're trying to work towards is drawing more attention to some of this hidden heritage that exists in the area. And we have thanked B&Q as a project because it is good that these sorts of memorials are still there for people to see. Now, B&Q have another interesting military heritage asset in Burton-on-Trent. And this is a distribution centre of theirs. In fact, this is about as far as I can get at the moment towards a distribution centre. There's more modern buildings around the back. This distribution centre has got a wonderful story. And its first military tie-in is it was built during the First World War as a machine gun factory. Machinery for building machine guns was imported from America for it. But it didn't come into production until November 1918. So anyone who knows about the First World War will know it ended on the 11th of November 1918. So the factory was redundant. Another nice part of the story is it was bought by the food makers Cross and Blackwell in 1920. And so the machine gun factory at Branston became the first home of Branston Pickle. It was actually then brought back into military service, and in fact, my own grandmother worked there sewing armour uniforms during the Second World War. So we're looking forward to visiting there in the near future and recording the condition of the First World War machine gun factory part of the site. And I don't think you can talk about military heritage without talking about remembrance. This is a Lichgate at St Mary's Church in Marston-on-Dove. Lovely little village. On the floodplain, I have a phone absolutely full of pictures of flooding this winter. But this village church, Lichgate, is there as a distinct war memorial. It's become something of a people's memorial. And unlike the sort of more formal war memorials you might be accustomed to seeing in town squares and outside of a village green, it attracts this informal remembrance with a variety of people bringing poppies and wreaths, not always on Remembrance Sunday, local school children painting pebbles. And there are several military gravestones, which is unusual to actually find in Britain, such a large number of army gravestones. And those are maintained well. None of the military gravestones has been left untended. They all have wreaths, poppies or flowers on them. And for me, I find this churchyard very moving because it shows me that people do still connect through the stonework, through the woodwork that you can see, through the memorials, through buildings, through the things that refer to the conflicts of the 20th century. People connect that to the remembrance of people just like us, just like them, who gave their everything during that conflict for what they believed in. And I think that gives a very good justification, that value that people place upon this cultural heritage, this puts a very good argument as to why we should know more about it and why we should, through that, be protecting it. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope, I can't see the number of people viewing. I hope it's not too many less than and thank you very much indeed.